Alright everyone, welcome back again to some more Witch on the Holy Night. It's about 3 a.m. here, and that goes to show how much I'm enjoying this game. I play it a lot, I really do. Like, I play it almost like every couple of hours here and there, and right now, I just happen to be awake and wanted to try it out again this minute. So, if anything else guys, hope you all continue to enjoy. Thank you again for all the love and support, and let's start it. Alright everyone, welcome back. Though she showed no signs of exhaustion despite the fact that she must have hit peak long ago, she always seemed raring to go. It wasn't that she was trying to act tough. That was just the kind of person she was. Always positive, always tough as nails. And that was exactly why she came off as completely irrational at times. But if that was the case, you could probably describe Alice in exactly the same way. Sojiro couldn't help but feel a bit inadequate when he saw their single-minded focus on their goals. He'd been so preoccupied with adjusting to his new life that he'd neglected to think about what he was going to do with himself after. Thinking about this cast a gloomy cloud over his heart. He felt like he'd never find a clear purpose in life like Aoko and Alice seemed to have. At least, not since he left the mountains. His old life was gone now, never to return. He was like a kite cut from its string, destined to fly only where the winds took it. And without anything to ground him, he couldn't do anything about the empty future that lay ahead. He could only let himself fly where the currents took him, slowly losing sight of the ground below.
そうだな。便利なものは溢れているけど、本当に望むものは。
The town was full of options, but he could find nothing. He'd asked himself the same questions time and time and again. It never made him feel any better. If anything, it only made him feel worse and worse. That, or maybe he felt lamenting his own ineptitude would lead to finding some kind of goal or desire someday. Tired of his own sniveling, Sojiro dejectedly closed his notebook. When he looked up, he saw his own face reflected back at him in the TV screen. His new collar was there around his neck, looking as out of place as ever. Perhaps a fool like him who felt weak when faced with others' strengths did need to wear a collar after all.
まったくだ。悩むのは一丁前になってから。
Yeah man, you shouldn't have to feel bad about that. Not many people know what they want to do when they're this young. Or at least your age. He shook off his thoughts of doom and gloom and sat up straight. After psyching himself up a little, he stood up from the sofa.
よし。何か作るけど、アリスは？
Sojiro asked casually. While Sojiro had been doing his own thing, he had remained mindful of Alice. Alice looked up, surprised at hearing her name. She had completely forgotten Sojiro was even there.
私？
ああ。アリス、朝から紅茶しか飲んでないだろ。どうせ作るなら、いっぱい作った方がお得なんだ。
Without waiting for her reply, Sojiro headed off to the kitchen while putting on his apron. Alice tried to wave at him to stop, but by then, he had already disappeared into the kitchen. She was hesitant to walk all the way in there just to tell him she didn't need anything. And besides, she was actually hungry. Sojiro's proposal made sense, and her empty stomach agreed. Alice was hungry, and Sojiro was going to make lunch. Making lunch for both of them would save the time and trouble of cooking two separate meals. There was no logical reason for Alice to refuse his gesture. She decided to stay quiet and tacitly accept his offer.
変な人。
She whispered the word softly, not for anyone in particular to hear but herself. I just saw a tinge of a blush on her face. It's working. The truth was, however, Alice had been in a bad mood all morning. After checking all the sigils around Misaki City and boarding the first train back from Tokawa, all she wanted to do was spend the rest of her day reading until the words turned into a jumble. Her iron resolve to complete this task would not be interrupted by someone else milling about in the drawing room. This was her mansion, and there was no way she was going to lock herself up in her room on account of Sojiro. However, with that said, she knew it would be wrong to kick Sojiro out for no real reason. As it stood, Sojiro had actually kept quiet like she'd asked. He wasn't in the wrong here. If Alice had really wanted to be alone, she should have gone to her room.
静かにしてじゃなくて一人にさせてと言うべきだった。
Alice had defiantly stayed in the drawing room despite realizing the dilemma she put herself in. She had figured Sojiro would eventually make a ruckus and run off to hide in his attic room. Her assumption could not have been more wrong. Sojiro never left the drawing room. Moreover, she had actually stopped caring that he was there. Though he hadn't paid her any attention, he hadn't ignored her either. They had simply sat in silence together without any awkwardness. Alice felt the freedom of being alone along with the comfort of someone being by her side. To put it into words, Sojiro was just that kind of person. That was probably the only reason Alice had been able to sleep so soundly with him there next to her. Sojiro continued cooking in the kitchen, oblivious to the thoughts that went through Alice's head. She couldn't see him from the drawing room, but she could easily imagine him cooking in the kitchen.
変な人ね、本当に。
Alice resumed reading after unwittingly stating her feelings out loud a second time. The sunlight beaming into the drawing room showed that it was noon. The sunlight actually looked warm, despite it being a cloudy winter day. Just as noon struck, Sojiro returned to the drawing room with 2 sets of plates. Some food of an indescribable color was piled on the large cream-colored plates.
これは
She hadn't expected much, and since she also hadn't requested anything, she could just refuse if it was something she didn't want. But this food left her at a loss for words despite psyching herself up.
これは何？
Alice spoke as though she was terrified of what had been placed before her.
ん？何って焼きうどんに何かかけてみた。
That music, though. If Aoko had been there, she probably would have punched him. But Sojiro just confidently placed the 2 large plates on the table. Steam billowed from the mountain of food like an angry volcano ready to erupt at any moment. The thick mystery sauce flowed over the plates as magma might from said eruption. And below it all were a seemingly infinite number of slimy tentacle-like noodles. There was really nothing more to say about it. This was clearly the food of a poor, struggling student who favored quantity over quality. All that was required was a basic recipe that would the will to cook something, and what few ingredients were needed. The pile of stir-fried noodles with sauce slathered on top was so horrifically bad, it was almost an art form. This was a bachelor's cooking if she'd ever seen it. There was really nothing else you could call it. They played that murder music real well, too. She had wondered what he was doing for an hour in there, and it turned out he had been making this sauce. No sauce would have been fine, but Sojiro had wholeheartedly gone the extra mile. Sojiro bowed his head slightly and picked up his chopsticks. He had brought a fork for Alice. It's shaking. She picked up the fork and stuck it into the noodles, half drowning in sauce. Sojiro began eating, not seeming to care that Alice sat there looking like she was about to eat poison. Seeming to view this as a challenge, Alice furrowed her brow and slowly brought the massive noodles to her mouth. It was a little salty and ugly to look at, but it didn't taste all that bad. If anything, it was actually pretty good.
一つ聞きたいんだけど。
Sojiro put down his chopsticks and turned to speak to Alice.
実際の話、魔術師の話はともかくとして、青崎はまだ誰にも手を出してないんじゃないか。
Alice looked up quietly at the sudden question. She had been inspecting Sojiro's meal, but now she looked straight at him.
おかしなことを聞くのね、しずきくんは。
アリスには悪いけど、これは青崎本人には聞きようのないことだから。言いたくなければ答えないでくれ。
Alice didn't respond. Sojiro resumed eating, not seeming disappointed. Alice stared blankly at him slurping his noodles. After much hesitation, she replied.
しずきくんの言う通り、青子はまだ人を殺したことはないわ。その行為自体は何回かこなしてはいるけれど。
Alice's response was slow and measured. Sojiro still looked troubled. But not the conversation they were having. Rather, he looked apologetic towards Alice. He said she didn't have to answer if she didn't want to, but Alice kept talking despite the face he was making.
しずきくんが見た公園での出来事が、青子にとって初めての殺人行為よ。あいにく相手は人形だったけど。
Sojiro silently nodded. Alice narrowed her eyes at him suspiciously.
まるで初めから分かっていた素振りね。
そうじゃな。いや、そうなのかな。たまにその手のセリフを言うけど、何か違う気がしたんだ。だから多分、青崎はまだ人殺しというのを体験していないんじゃないかって。でもまあ、そんなことよりもっと確かなのは、
しずきくんが今生きているということね。
Sojiro chuckled at Alice's stellar response. Exactly. Things would have been more clear-cut that night if Aoko had actually killed someone before. Sojiro would have been dead before he ever even saw her face. For better or for worse, Aoko remained inexperienced in spite of her ruthlessness and decisiveness. Sojiro relaxed his shoulders. His stern face gradually returned to its normal carefree state. Then,
でもそんなことは関係ないわ。あの子はそのあたりが異常だから。行為は理性に、経験は知識でたやすく補ってしまう。そうね。青子はその気になれば迷うことなく人の命に手を出せる。しずきくん風に言うのならだけど。
and with that, Alice went back to twirling noodles around their fork. She looks like she's having fun, Sojiro thought as he ruminated over what she just said. She was rational enough to accept herself despite acting against society's morals, and possessed an intellect that exceeded even to the confidence gained through experience. Had Aoko been raised to utilize her logic and reason to forge reality from fiction? If that was the case, then perhaps they were really different from Sojiro.
すまない。こんなことを聞いたのは、青崎には内緒にしておいてくれないか。
Sojiro seemed serious as if he really regretted asking. Alice's expression remained unchanged, but she had never intended on saying anything to Aoko anyway.
ありがとう。なんだか、アリスには内緒話ばかり溜まっていくね。
Sojiro went back to eating his food. Though Alice had still only had a single bite, he was already scraping his clean.
そういえば青崎にも聞いたんだけど、アリスと青崎はいつもああなのか？
Sojiro had suddenly decided to change the topic of conversation. His new topic was the rather cold and dry relationship between Aoko and Alice. Aoko said their relationship was normal, but maybe Alice had a different opinion.
会話が少ないことを言っているのならそうなるわ。けど別に不便じゃないから。
Alice was still twirling noodles with her fork as she gave her concise answer. Around and around the noodles went, but none made it into her mouth.
不便じゃないって、そういうの仲がいいって言わないんじゃないのか。
私と青子の仲が良くないとしずきくんは困るの？
Sojiro swallowed his words at Alice's perplexed reply. It would actually, but he wasn't sure how to respond when asked so directly.
いや、なんかこっちの考え方が悪かったみたいだ。もうその話題には触れないことにしたから忘れてくれ。それより、アリス。
Sojiro gave Alice a piercing stare that was more intense than any time they'd talked before. Alice was taken slightly aback at the unusually intense look in his eyes. Her face became slightly flushed out of nervousness. Nobody besides Aoko had ever stared at her like this before. Whether or not he noticed, Sojiro waited a few moments before speaking slowly and with complete conviction.
それ、食べないなら欲しいんだけど。
I knew it. I knew it was something stupid. Her face went back to sullen. An awkward silence followed.
悪いけど、これ、私のだから。
Well, at least she likes it. Shizuki had cooked it, sure, but Alice wasn't wrong. He made it for her after all. There was a slight tinge of anger in her voice, but even she wasn't sure why it was there.
そうだね。少し意地汚かった。
Sojiro plopped himself down on the sofa. This must have looked particularly pathetic to Alice since she responded.
その、材料はもう残ってないの？
She quickly covered her mouth. Apparently, she had surprised even herself. It was quite unusual for her to ask something like that.
残ってないよ。青崎の分も作っちゃったから。
Sojiro stared a bit regretfully at Alice's plate as he responded. Alice could have just let it go, but for some reason she felt the need to speak up again.
青子なら、眠っているけど。
So you want to eat Aoko's now?
いや、もうすぐ起こすから。起きた後で作らされるより、一緒に作っておいた方が楽だしね。と、もうすぐ1時か。ちょうどいい。行って起こしてくるよ。
青子は、起こしたら殺すって言ってたけど。
Alice wasn't sure why Sojiro was willing to take such a risk. Sojiro agreed, but started walking anyway.
でもさ、今起こしておかないと、やっぱり後で殺される運命にあると思うんだ。
Ah, yes, the lose-lose situation. His words were surprisingly affectionate. Leaving Alice with only that, Sojiro headed to Aoko's room. Alice watched him leave in silence before taking another bite of the stir-fried noodles. Glancing at the door to the hallway to make sure nobody was coming, she took another bite. She repeated that process many times before finishing her food. It was then that she heard Aoko's wrath coming from the second floor. Alice stood up and began solemnly clearing the table, feeling a bit sorry for what Sojiro was dealing with. She knew she didn't really have to, but she felt like it was the least she could do for him. She'd never really expected to feel this way. But he'd cooked for her, and it was surprisingly good. Almost enough to make her forget how bad he was at making tea. Scarred Scar Red. Interesting. So we finished this chapter now. Alright, next episode. December, the month when even monks were busy at work. It was the culmination of the year. Perhaps due to all the put-off tasks that build up through the seasons, the month always seemed to pass by in a blink of an eye. It was a day like any other in December. Though none of them were any the wiser to what the others were doing, Aoko, Alice, and Sojiro had spent the day attending to their own affairs.
Nani? Kore.
Suppressing the urge to murder someone, her terrifying voice boomed across the room. The sunroom was often used to dine in when the weather was nice since it overlooked the courtyard. It was a room decorated with high-quality furniture and upholstery, befitting an historic Western-style mansion. The fusion of Chinese Chippendale aesthetics and traditional English Georgian elegance caused even Aoko, a commoner, to think twice about doing anything unaristocratic on the grounds. Truthfully, she was sickened by the flagrant waste of money, but none of it was paid for out of her pocket, so she could have cared less what the purchaser spent her money on. 3 unbelievably out-of-place offerings sat atop the lavish sunroom's table as if enshrined. In stark contrast to the room, they appeared like meals prepared by aliens.
Soujuuro. これ、なんか新しい冗談。
Aoko's trembling fists clenched and unclenched as she questioned the one responsible for today's menu. The clock struck 9 in the evening. The chef in charge nodded dutifully, eager to explain.
これはうちの会社の新製品。パチモン臭いが、中身は本当にパチモンだ、と木の実が言ってた。でも、そんなことより評価すべきは、社内販売なんで1個40円を切る低価格だ。すごいぞ。卵をつけても60円とか。
The lackluster chef seemed pleased with himself as he boasted. Aoko wanted to grumble that the real steal was her appetite.
そう、よかったわね。ところで、今日の夕飯はどこにあるの？
The chef thought for a second or two, then clapped his hands together in revelation.
青崎、そんなに食べると太るよ。
Wow. It was nice knowing you, Sojiro.
つまり、これが夕飯だって言い張る気なのね、あんたは！
言い張るも何も、これ以外用意していない。
The two stood there, glaring at each other. Aoko gave off an air that said she would rather die than eat his food, while Sojiro was convinced that she would capitulate eventually. So confident he even considered chiding her about being so picky. As usual, the two could not see eye to eye.
いや、私は食べないからね、こんなの。
お姫様みたいなこと言うんじゃない。だいたい、今日の夕食代はこれで3名様、200円未満なんだぞ。
Sojiro puffed his chest out at his penny-pinching prowess. Alice alternated her gaze between the two quarreling roommates and the strange food before her, which she had also never seen before. She remained a mere bystander in all this.
信じられない。一人60円の食事って、あんた一体いつの生まれよ。このご時世、新しくできた牛丼屋ですら贅沢に原価上げてるわよ、バカ。
青崎、1ヶ月の食費が3万円だけで、あんな好き勝手な食生活をしていたら、俺が君たちに殺される前に全員が飢え死ぬと思うんだ。
Ooh, got her with a shot.
確かに、昨日のアリスの肉料理は素晴らしかった。グラム700円から肉は種類が変わるんだって感動した。生協の果汁 100% ジュースだって、ちょっと本気でバカにできるもんじゃないと反省したよ。けど、あれが3日続いたら、この家はどうなってしまうんだい？
Sojiro was making perfect sense for once. Fortunately, neither Aoko nor Sojiro noticed the silent stare of the disapproval coming from Alice.
その時はその時よ。それにね、昨日みたいなのはめったにないの。アリスはあんたの料理に触発されて柄にもなく頑張ったみたいだけど。
With Aoko's words, Alice closed her eyes. She might have been trying to quell her anger.
信じられない。じゃあ、今までどんな生活してたんだ、青崎たちは。
その時はそれぞれで何とかやってたわ。飢え死に一歩手前ぐらい、いい精神修行じゃない。
Her brazen response left him speechless. Though a story for another time, Sojiro remembered a warning from a certain vice president who was complaining about a certain president incessantly bugging him to take her to lunch at the end of the month. But that was neither here nor there.
そんな昔のことより今のこと。前に見せたあの腕はどこに行ったのよ、宗十郎。あれを見込んで今日の夕飯を任せたっていうのに。
Out of everything, that seemed to be what ate at Aoko the most. The stir-fried yaki udon he had prepared previously had been very well received. It had even melted away Aoko's morning grumpiness with just one bite. However, Sojiro had not seen fit to tell them that that was one of the only dishes in his limited repertoire. For a bachelor, the ability to cook is as close to superpower as one could get. 15 years into the future, it would likely become a highly desirable trait. Regardless, that misunderstanding had led Aoko and Alice to overestimate Sojiro's culinary talents. Her ire finally made sense to Sojiro.
わかった。自腹を切るから出前を取ろう。作るにしても材料がないからな。
My guy cooked, and she's ungrateful. Poor Sojiro.
その代わり、それは回収する。
Aoko basked in her victory. It was then after seeing Sojiro's face as he went to fetch the delivery menu, Aoko realized her misreading of him. What annoyed Aoko most was the fact that such little effort was put into dinner. But to Sojiro, this dinner had not been about cutting corners, but rather about a meal he had legitimately wanted to try. Aoko ruminated on how it could possibly pass as food for someone raised in the mountains. And then...
アリス、何してるの？
Aoko noticed Alice standing near the table, holding one of the bowls tightly.
もうそれはいいんだってば。宗十郎に返してきちんとした出前にしましょう。
Despite Aoko's words, Alice stood her ground firmly, clutching the bowl. In fact, she seemed to be embracing it.
これ、私のだから。
Oh, there's one grateful person in here. Alice's faint voice drifted across the sunroom. And just like that, the night's menu had been decided by majority rule. Aoko's shoulders sank in disappointment at her lot that evening. Come to think of it, Alice was always peculiar about things she deemed were hers. It was morning and there were 10 days left in December. While the rest of the city was preparing for Christmas festivities, Sojiro headed to his part-time job. Though it looked like it could snow at any minute, the tree-lined streets were bustling with people. These days were particularly merry. Students on winter break spent their days hanging out with friends while they counted down the days until seasonal holidays. A flashy banner for Christmas cakes. Huge advertisements adorning the building fronts. The station plaza bustling with pop-up stalls. From among the crowd in this heaving district, Sojiro stepped into a phone booth. Safe from the winter wind, the inside seemed warm by comparison. The thought that it would actually be nice to have one in the mountains crossed his mind as he inserted a coin into the phone. He dialed the number from memory, his hand moving on its own. After about 5 seconds, the phone began to ring. Another 5 seconds. Another ring. 10 seconds had passed. He gazed through the window at the various signs on the surrounding buildings and marveled at the sheer number of people out and about so early. The number he dialed was that of Tobimaru Tsukiji. The Tsukiji name was well known in Misaki as a distinguished land-owning family going back generations. Incidentally, their residence was located in the neighboring town of Yashirogi. The ringtone was finally replaced by the kind voice of an elderly woman. After her polite greeting, she handed the phone over to Sojiro's target.
おはよう、飛び丸。
はい、おはよ
He was still half asleep, or so it sounded to Sojiro.
一つ相談があるんだけど、いいか？
う。ああ、陽気に計らえ。
His response did not exactly inspire confidence in Sojiro, but he cut right to the chase. The vice president pause was a long one. He was hard to read from this end of the receiver.
単純なことで俺を起こすな。いいか、宗十郎。仲が悪けりゃ遊びに行け。機嫌を取りたきゃいいとこ見せろ。で、それが合わなきゃ早めに手を切れ。俺ができるアドバイスはそんなもんだ。
And with a piece, Tobimaru hung up. It may have been 10 in the morning to Sojiro, but after dealing with what seemed like a 6 o'clock Tobimaru, all he could do was accept his advice. He could say all he liked about the guy's tone, but deep down, he knew that his advice was sound. After the phone ordeal, Sojiro finished up his shopping and returned to the mansion just before noon. He was greeted by the sight of Aoko and Alice sitting in silent gloom. Though unsure of the circumstances from the outside looking in, it seemed like the aftermath of an argument. It was similar to the calm after a violent blizzard accompanied by biting winds and stinging hail. Or a similar atmosphere to the inside of an industrial freezer. It would not have been surprising to look up and see icicles hanging from the ceiling.
やっぱり、今日もか。
He felt like a zookeeper pained to see the raccoon and penguin at each other's throats. He had seen this at his job at the zoo where he was a cleaner. Sojiro found himself staring at them with the familiar forlorn look of a zookeeper. Needless to say, the silence meant that they were not fighting at this moment. Dinner served as a respite from the infighting. Sojiro was oblivious to the circumstances surrounding the quarrel, but their day-to-day out battles against the mysterious mage was clearly taking a toll.
もっともアリスはいつも通りだけど
Facing a quiet and contemplative Aoko, Alice was reading an old book, now sat on her lap as she was accustomed to. The book seemed somehow heavier than the other ones. Alright guys, I'm going to end the video here for today. Thank you all for watching. When we come back, I'm going to continue on in this new chapter.